Welcome everyone to I4J's sixth interactive, a tongue twister, sixth interactive video presentation and Q&A session with Cosmin Gheorghe. Did I get that right? Gheorghe.
Gheorghe, but it doesn't
Gheorghe.
matter. As we convened, is a nightmare of a name. So.
I tried to get it right, but Cosmin's topic today is, will your culture survive disruption? So David and Vint, in their entrepreneurial way, have encouraged me to host this series for I4J. It's not my day job, so I'll do a quick intro and then we'll jump into the presentation itself. So my name is Ben Baldwin, and I'm the founder of a company named Scale Driver. It's innovation consulting, but instead of consultants, we match executives with innovators within an agile framework that helps predict innovation and speed it up so that everybody succeeds. So I love topics like this because they're about innovation. In particular, culture makes or helps innovation stick. So I like the idea as well of using live video like this because it's a great way to introduce ourselves to the group and to share what we're working on and maybe even ask for help. And when it's synchronous, we can all learn from each other. So all I ask when we're using this technology is that before you ask Cosmin a question, just unmute yourself. And then when you're done asking your question, mute yourself again just to avoid any background noise. But also introduce yourself to Cosmin and to everybody in the group. And I'll also note that this is it's being recorded, so it's just worth you knowing that. And with that, I guess the last point of business is this is open, so there are some people who may show up who are not a part of I4J. We tried to keep these things open, and so with that, I'll get out of the way and turn it over to Cosmin. Take it away.
Righty, I'll take it away. So I also want to thank you guys from I4J. I think this is just, it's truly a think tank. You know, we hear about talking think tanks. This is a huge tank of thinking. And David, who's present right here, and Vint Cerf are the co-founders, and I'm forever grateful because it's really a forum where I can put all these ideas that to many other people seem kind of wild, you know, and I appreciate that. And also I appreciate what Ben is doing, creating this series of how should I say, presentations is little said, as well as a friend, Ben Andy Haynes, who helped me kind of go through this presentation and kind of, you know, creating the story with it. So I'm just going to start by telling you that before this, you know, me and my friend Ben here, we're trying to figure out what the title for the presentation will be, right? And then he kept saying, you know, it has to be catchy, it has to appeal to something. And I said, no, it doesn't have to be. So what I wanted to do is to actually have this title, which hopefully, this is the title that I wanted to have, right? Culture, software of the mind, what connects humans, business, jobs, and artificial intelligence. And Ben said, you know, I think that might be kind of too, like, explaining too much, is boring, people don't, you know, it has to be something catchy. And I kind of said, you know, it doesn't have to appeal necessarily to basic instincts. People, you know, like to think and everything. Anyway, so the reason I'm saying that is because it just occurred to me that between these two titles, there are just difference of perception of the world. And this is what actually culture is. And this is where the disruption comes. Because, you know, me and Ben, we're two people, we also like each other, so we were able to sort it out. But what happens when this becomes a full disruption? When people are not able to sort out these differences, you know? And it's not that one is wrong, one is right. The idea is, what is the goal? How do you want to go towards that goal? And there are different ways of getting there. So, you know, originally I thought it was a title clash, but in fact, it's not a title clash. It's basically a culture clash. It's a difference of beliefs and values and expectations from the others. You know, ecosystems, cultures and ecosystem, John Hagel was talking about ecosystems, don't seem to be what the ones that we have right now, they don't seem to be what we need. And disruption is not only this type of dialogue between two people who want to figure out what a title should be, but think about financial crisis, about refugee crisis. Think about, you know, the guys in Italy, some villages, Italy and Sweden, they were buying repackaged loans of people from California who defaulted on the loans, and all these things happen on a daily basis. And this is what disruption is. And I put there disruption, and then I thought, you know, is it the disruption or is it opportunity, right? Why is this happening? It's happening because there is an exponential development of technology, and that links us in a very across regions and across cultures in a way that never, ever happened before. You know, until now, diversity was sort of a whim that people, you know, let's have diversity in our organization or whatever. Now it's not that. It's basically happening. We have to deal with it. It's not a choice anymore. And so that you don't need to believe me what I'm saying, this is a 2016 report of Global Human Capital Trends by Deloitte. And they talk about how globalization has exponentially increased interdependence between all groups of people, right? That's why they say that there are sweeping global forces that are reshaping the workplace and the workforce and the work itself. And then the innovation part. And then the fact that the workforce is not only multicultural, but is younger and older, and there are women, and there are all sorts of people with all sorts of ideas coming in. And there's a new way of interacting with the employees. This is what Deloitte was coming up with a year ago only, that culture, engagement, global leadership are urgent priorities. But the issue is that is a huge gap between what these priorities and what we actually are able to do about. So what people do is just kind of leave their jobs. And they leave their jobs, you know, is not a small number. Like only in the United States, 2 million people leave organizations due to lack of engagement. And that cost in the United States more than the combined revenue of 4 companies. And you know which one those companies are? Amazon, Goldman Sachs, Google, and Starbucks. So these organizations spend more money than the revenue of these 4 giants. And I didn't even include there the cost due to legal liability and, you know, reputation and all that. So then we have David Norford's math, right? Because this is very powerful, right? We have 3 billion people who could work, 3 billion want the job, only 1.3 have it. And from these guys, 13% only are engaged. That means that 86% of us hate, dislike, or are indifferent towards their job. And we still produce 75 trillion world economy. And then we have these guys in Romania installing air conditionings and servicing them, right? Look at these guys. They seem pretty happy there. Like you know, you balance it out. You got to balance it out. Otherwise, it doesn't work. This is probably by the Black Sea somewhere in a hotel, you know. What's wrong with that air conditioning? I don't know. Yon, let's fix it. So we're going to come back to these guys, and we'll see what's happening with them. But, you know, I don't know. Yeah, I'm thinking, like, would you call these guys to install, I don't know, in California, Tesla batteries on the 3rd floor on the wall? If you call them, you have to figure out how to tell them what to do. So let me just kind of define a little bit what culture is, because there is a lot of talk about culture, and everybody uses this word and in different senses. So for me, I'm going to give you a very broad definition. Culture is a set of behaviors, values, symbols, norms, expectations, beliefs that are shared, which are shared by a group of people, right? So in that sense, we're here a group of people, and we're here a culture, a very simple one, but we do have something that links us. Otherwise, we wouldn't come together. What happens is that when we come together, we bring our own values and beliefs there. So somehow we have to interact with each other. But the issue is that there are certain values, beliefs, and behaviors that we acquire when between 0 and 10 years old, when our intellect is not developed. So how do we get those values and beliefs? They get imprinted, and they usually get imprinted by association with an emotion, because our intellect doesn't function, or doesn't function that well. So they get imprinted, they get branded by association with our emotion. And a lot of times they stay at the unconscious or subconscious level. And guess what? Our behaviors come from there. Our behaviors are influenced and sometimes determined by this set of core values, beliefs, and expectations and norms that we acquire, not on an intellectual level. And I know that VCs and CEOs and VPs are going to tell you that is not true. But a lot of times, decisions and choices are influenced by this set of values and beliefs. And we're talking a lot about freedom of choice. And yeah, we do have a freedom of choice, but sometimes freedom of choice looks like this. Which way you want to go, left or right? Pick and choose. It's not always like that. But sometimes it is. And it's only normal to be influenced by these core values and beliefs, because what happens is that our identity, our individual identity, our sense of self develops only when we come together. We cannot develop as individuals as healthy, fulfilled I mean by happy, unless we come together with those that we feel we belong to, right? And the issue here is that culture, and that's why I call it software of the mind, it is like a software, because it's what wires our brain. And in order to have people from belonging to different cultures and different groups working together, in order to have them work optimally together, you have to optimize that software. Otherwise, it's not working, right? There are two computers that don't talk to each other, two groups of people that don't communicate with each other. It's a little bit different also because, right, we're different than computers, because if we were like computers, it would be easy to optimize. And that's why you need people who kind of are accustomed with how the mind works. What we need to make sure is that people have these, the communication between them is optimized. And that's why I do what is called cultural intelligence, because I believe that that's what optimizes the way people interact, even if they have different values and belief. So, and how does that happen? It happens by assessing what we call culture metrics. John Hagel, a couple of weeks ago, was talking about intentional ecosystems. And he was talking about the fact that we learn and scalable learning. So he was talking about the fact that we learn much better when we are together. And that's true. The key issue for me here is that although we're wired to assemble together, we understand that togetherness very different. And what I mean by that is, look at these guys, right? They're all together, right? What are they doing? They're eating some milk. What do you think that the mom of that girl says? No, don't drink milk on the floor. It's not okay. Right? The child doesn't know that because the values and beliefs have not been yet imprinted, but they are going to be. No, humans don't eat from the floor. Why? I don't know. They don't eat. It's dirty. So it's the notion of dirt, clean. All these things start to build up. But until then, it works. And let's go back to our guys from Romania installing the air conditioning there, right? They have also a very particular sense of togetherness. I mean, teamwork and all that, talking about teamwork, you really have to make sure that your team is, works well together, because otherwise you're not going to fix that air conditioning. Actually, you're going to fall. So now going back to it turns out that the world is not necessarily anymore a group of isolated cultures that look like this. The world looks more like this right now. That means that there are a number of cultures, and to that I would add objects and products and services, and then virtual reality is coming, and then artificial intelligence is coming. And I think that this is what John Hagel calls an ecosystem, maybe not intentional, but it's an ecosystem where all these things come together and they cross each other, creating these hybrid cultures. So how do we deal with this? Because look, we need to figure out how to deal with that, and how to keep our cultures going, to surviving, not only surviving, but I hope thriving also. Why do we fear this type of interaction? Because when we interact with worlds that we don't know, that we seem to not kind of belong to, we fear, because we feel the risk of our identity disappearing in those worlds. Our identity stays perfect within our own culture, but within this crazy melange of cultures and objects and services and stuff, we fear that we're going to lose ourselves. And this is what happens, right? I can't make disappear the AI and culture 3 and 2, but this is what happens. I was telling you about John Hagel talking about intentional ecosystems, and he was talking about scalable efficiency, and he was saying that that's what we're going to do. We're going to let the artificial intelligence take care of that, and we're going to focus on scalable learning. But how do we get from where we are to intentional ecosystems? Because this is where we are. The real problem with humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So, we're good with the technology. We have to figure out with the other two. And, my specialty is not institutions, but for sure is what links humans, and emotions are part of that. So my solution to this, and my option, is what is called cultural intelligence. So how do you develop the ability to interact in an optimal way, not just interact to interact, across any culture? So it's not, you don't say that it's about national, or it's just an organization, or ethnic, or generational, or gender. And I was happy. I asked John Hagel, and I said, what are the variables of your intentional ecosystems? And this is what he told me. He told me passion, which I equivalent with motivation. What is the reason for which we do things? How do we strongly believe that we should do certain thing and not another? And then he talked about connecting disposition, the ability to get together. And then the reactive disposition, which is our reaction to uncertainty. And it turns out that this is precisely the core of cultural intelligence, that focuses on motivation, on knowledge, on meta-knowledge, and on behavior. And you have here in these hexagons a few of the metrics that I use in cultural intelligence. And the perception of hierarchy. Do we want to be more equal or less equal? Do we want to uh, achieve things, or we want to enjoy life. And again, these are just the extremes, but everything in between is possible, and all these things in any combination. Do we care more about our own needs, or we care also about the collective needs? Do we care about respecting rules, or we kind of bend them from time to time in order to whatever we want to do? And what do we do in front of uncertainty? Because this is what disruption is about. It's uncertainty, it's chaos. Chaos is a complete lack of organization. And let me tell you, every single person, if you put them in an enough chaotic situation, are going to experience one thing, and that thing is anxiety. Because we're all wired towards the known, towards the togetherness, towards what matches us. So all these things, cultural intelligence, basically, the key here, you kept seeing this R, this is the relationship. How do you optimize the relationship between people who have different values and beliefs on one hand, and then how do you optimize the relationship with products? I mean, you know, the refrigerator is already talked, the whatever, the Amazon thing listens to you, the heater stops, whatever. All these things, you know, need to be optimized in a certain way. And I believe that this is what cultural intelligence does, right? It prevents the negative consequences of disruption. And it also facilitates learning in ways that you know, before and even now, learning is about some sort of obeying to people who supposedly know more than us. And how do you do that? In my view, is just kind of measure all these things on an individual basis, then make a sort of group aggregate, and then figure out how do you optimize the way people interact with each other. So I'm pretty much done here. I have some questions for you. And maybe if you don't mind to just pick a culture, it could be your workplace or your business, or it could be your nation, or it could be, you know, your age group or your ethnicity, and just think about it. Do you think that given this huge interdependence between worlds, between cultures, right? Culture defined in a general way. Do you think that that culture that you think of right now will survive disruption? And why do you think that? But of course, if you have other questions, I'm very happy to answer that.
Do you want us to unmute now and
Yeah,
participate, or do you want us to sort of be muted until we have a question?
well, we can unmute. I mean, we're few enough, I think.
It's up to you.
I think that I trust you guys, so let's just unmute.
All right.
I know, huge responsibility, but we share it together.
We're all unmuted now.
Yeah, we're all like that. Those guys on the ladder, right?
No, I do have a question before I pick my culture. Actually, it doesn't matter. I just have a question. So we talked about, you know, how we're all different and what could we do to make things better and work together better and achieve better results and all that. But what do you think would work? What would be a best approach or a better way to find a common ground to achieve things together and to basically be able to belong to different cultures but still survive in a way? Do you apply certain emotions, certain skills? What would you recommend?
Well, I think that first and foremost, and because we're kind of unequal in that throughout the world, but I think that one of the most important things is to fully, truly become aware, not only at the intellectual level, that we are different and that the world doesn't function like it used to be before. You know, I'm McDonald's, I just move in and I kind of adapt a little bit, but you kind of have to do it like me. It doesn't function that way anymore. And I think that gaining that awareness for me is the first step. But then we have to also understand, I mean, looking at this slide, to figure out what are the core values and beliefs that I have. How do I bring those? How to become aware? How do those influence the way I make decisions, the way I make choices? I think that there is a sort of a mindlessness, that slowly is disappearing, but it seems that it doesn't disappear as fast as the technology is improving. I don't know if I answered your question. You want specific things?
Oh, not really specific. I was
these are specific things. For example,
guidelines or for example, I don't get along with someone because they have a completely different view of something. Let's say
correct.
Politics.
You know what
So then how should I understand that this other person is different and has understands things differently, but then how do I still get along with that person? Because that's my goal, to be able to get along with them.
Well, at that point you have to figure out, so you look at these are, for example, good metrics, and I say metrics, I mean, you can do an assessment. I can do an assessment, but you can also kind of evaluate them. So the idea is, the goal is to get along, but at some point there are going to be deal breakers. So you got to figure out, what are those? And ultimately, the getting along, collaborating might be a choice. That means you can collaborate or not. In the end, if that doesn't work. Because there is always some room, and yes, it's not the ideal situation, but that needs to be kept in mind. But I think that's for me, like looking at these things, like what is the Einstein was saying that the view he was asked, what is one of the most fundamental questions that you have? And he said, is the world friendly or hostile? That was for him a fundamental question, because the answer to that will determine how does one behave in the world. If the world is hostile, then I want to either conquer it, or I'm just freaked out and I fear the world and I behave accordingly. Or if the world is friendly, then I'm going to be curious maybe and say, oh, let's see what the world offers me today. So if it goes to this type of I don't know, did I answer your question?
Yes, I think so. What I basically understand is that first we need to accept that we are all different, but we can still find ways to live together. So
or maybe not.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Or maybe not, and that's enough.
I think that if you start there to accept that you are different and others are different, and the people you are interacting with also understand that, then that's a good place to start.
Okay.
Maybe an additional question. This is Philip. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Philip.
Hi, Cosmin. So I was going to ask you if when you look at the dimensions that you have, uncertainty, flexibility, etc., if there isn't a hierarchy going forward that will determine who will survive and how well. And what I mean by that is, we're seeing, whether it's in corporation or in the economy in general, a trend that favors the anti-fragile. So the ability to adapt to risk, the ability to be more entrepreneurial, the agile approach to organizational structures or processes, or the business adapting to accelerating changes. And and I look at my own background, coming from Lebanon, and the entire, if you will, Phoenician heritage, is one where things were shaking all the time, and it was all about exploring new horizons, taking risks. You see some cultures, whether the Jewish culture, the Irish culture, where the ground have been shaking all the time, and these people have had to survive somehow and develop this flexibility. Otherwise, it's the end of the track for them. So I'm wondering if, as you look forward, there are some traits that are going to help people adapt into this new world, and that all cultures are not created equal, and to some extent, we have to reinforce the transition of these cultures towards this a situation where these traits are kind of become more part of the culture for everybody else. It's a long-winded question, but thanks.
Yeah, well, I think that one thing that I see that is not happening is this assumption that, as you said, we're not all equal, in the sense that, for example, things that we measure in countries like Lebanon or North Africa or south of Europe or Latin America, there are different ways of understanding, for example, togetherness as well as achievement. So the fact that one wants a little bit more of a liberal environment, it doesn't mean that wants it in the sense that we think here in California as native-born Americans. I would say Californians, to be more specific. And we see that a lot in being entrepreneurial in France is very different than being entrepreneurial in Silicon Valley, or in general in Europe. People, and not that one is better than the other, but people tend to, I am entrepreneurial, but first of all, European Union puts some money in. And second of all, I tend to just focus also on life, not entrepreneurial. The product doesn't become necessarily my life. So I think that and I was talking to Vint, who we were talking about, like, why is this like this? Like in some countries, people are, we're also talking, everybody says cloning Silicon Valley. Let's clone Silicon Valley in Paris, and then, or in Lebanon, and then that's all going to be fine. No, you can't clone Silicon Valley. You just can't. You can just kind of sort of try and create it, but you can't. You have local values, spreading democracy. You can't just spread democracy the way you understand. Like, let's throw some democracy in there. No, people have already from millennia. They have, as I said, those are, culture is powerful, is as powerful as a software, And I think that you need to just first meet those values and start from there. And that might be a very different level. I don't know, I kind of was going around also with my answer. But, I was talking to Vint at the I4J summit, and we were saying, like, why are, for example, people in Europe, they have a different threshold for anxiety and risk and everything. And then I said, and then we laughed, everybody said, well, yeah, but those who didn't kind of migrated to the United States and the New World. And that's what happens also. Like, you have to be resilient, otherwise you disappear. But if you were not challenged, like Jewish population, if you are not challenged, you didn't develop that resilience. The more you were challenged, you either were extinguished or not. And I think that we shouldn't put things as strong as we should just, like the survival type of mode, to be honest. That's why I didn't really like the title. Like, with your culture survive, like, what should we do? Like, be Darwinists? No, we can help everybody get there. It's possible. I truly believe that it's possible.
So, Cosmin, back to your, sorry, go ahead, David.
Yeah, so when we talk about culture and generally social, the word we is very much at the center, right? And actually, we can mean two things. Right? We can either be like you and I, we, and it doesn't really contain any attributes whatsoever. It's just you and it's me. That's the interpersonal we. Or it can be the collective we, which is like, we Swedes or whatever, and that doesn't have anything interpersonal in it. It's all about, the attributes that we share collectively that put us into this other collective we. And and so the culture is somehow a collective we, anywhere when we are conscious about it. But our interactions in it is often the interpersonal we, right? So you have almost like a competition between these, right? And if you have some cultures are more strict, and they say that the collective we is more important than the impersonal we, because we of this ethnicity don't marry people of that ethnicity. Mm-hmm. Or if you meet somebody of that ethnicity that you really fall in love with, you can say we there, that this is more important than the collective identity. And I think that we liberals, that's collective we, often want to think that a culture should be like an aggregate of interpersonal we's, that we come together like a cluster and we all have a good time together, and that forms a culture. And then you got more of the others that put the collective we above, and that's more like the, shall we say, commando cultures. And somehow right now in the world today, I see it's like a fight between these. So that they're competing, right? So I'm thinking, obviously, I would like to have the cultures that are the aggregate of interpersonal we's to kind of win this one, right? But the way the world is looking, there's nothing that says that that's going to happen. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, what you're talking about is these actually key metrics, but they're all connected. So this one, individual and collective, right? So what we look at, that there are groups of people who care, the so-called individualistic cultures, and that's not a way to be judgmental. It's just simply a way to describe it. And there are cultures that put the collective behind that. The individualist cultures, they focus on the immediate needs, and they believe that, for example, what is fast and big is the best. Whereas the collective cultures, they think, okay, individual needs are good, but ultimately we're also responsible to the community. And that's why you have public services that are in a way in Sweden and in a different way in the United States. Right? So I think that how do you deal with this? Yeah, I would like the world to be more like Sweden. But if you ask some other people around us, they would think that's stupid. Why? Because that's probably communism or something, that the government intervenes into my things, that all these things that they have. So, and they have their own, because why? Because the culture wired them in a certain way. So how do these two cultures can talk together? In my view, would be just to simply just look at the metrics and look at the results and talk. But that's very hard at the nation level. We can do that in small groups, and I think that we managed to do that very well in communities that are open, right? Open systems that are not closed within their own beliefs. On the other hand, I don't know. I understand people because, as I said, culture is very powerful and we're wired in a certain way, but we can't expect changes sooner than, within a generation or so.
So if I get you right, you're kind of saying that a good recipe would be to have like smaller units, so that it's not only all people and then you have the big community, but that you have you divide this in sort of smaller groups and then groups of smaller groups and so on. So you get this structure so you can keep the interpersonality on each level. I heard you say. Yeah.
Yes, like a little bit like this image, I'm thinking, to have all these small clusters and they just come together and then interact and then from there expand to that. But to not really. I mean, until now, people have the tendency to kind of march in a place and want to change it, you know, and that's the view of the sort of almost like as if the whole world around us is hostile and needs to be conquered. So I'm thinking, but you know, one thing that, David, that I'm struggling with is sometimes is the fact that I realize, and we were talking, I don't know if you remember, that somehow, you know, Jung was great, but Adler was, often I realize Adler was right. Adler was saying that the main drive behind the human being is power and achievement. And yeah, it's true that there are cultures, you know, where that is not that strong. But it seems that ultimately that's a very powerful thing. So my work right now, it revolves around that. How do you deal with power and that desire? And it has to do with education. It has to start when you're young.
Well, I'm interested in, this is an important topic for we Canadians. I think that, I wonder how many Americans there are on the call, as opposed to participating Americans. Canada is one of those funny countries where if I disguise my accent, you won't know where I'm from. We appear very similar. We're very close, share the longest border, but as soon as you cross over, there are different conventions that govern us. One is perception of risk. Risk is a negative word in Canada in general. I'm going to generalize here a little bit. And in the United States, it's a positive word. Also, up here, there's no real force of unification. We like the idea of Canada. What is a Canadian is something we struggle with. We embrace and struggle with it at the same time. It's very complex, whether it's immigration or whether it's, I mean, we have a joke, but it's not really a joke, where if the United States invaded Canada, we wouldn't realize it because we don't really think about a border. We don't think about, it would be a population that would come in here and just kind of integrate. And it would be, when you think back to world wars, we participated in wars. Thankfully, something like that hasn't happened in such a big scale recently, but we think a lot about identity. We're very patriotic, but we're certainly not the melting pot. We are the mosaic of different cultures here. So you can, just down the street from me, there's a Chinatown, and Chinatown is a huge number of people they do not know how to speak, sorry, they don't know how to speak English. Or in Greektown, there would be a bunch of people who can retain their culture as fully as possible. Quebec has French signs in it. But we struggle a little bit when we think about what is a Canadian, the whole we piece. And when we want to build a business, we go to the United States, or we call American customers because they can make decisions faster. So we're in this sort of, it's an interesting spot as the world becomes more global. What is it to be a Canadian, a mosaic, versus a homogenized sort of perspective from a power point of view, an economic point of view? I wonder.
Yeah, I think that identity is another key issue. You know, identity as an individual, as well as a nation, as well as an organization, and this is what is getting scrambled right now. I mean, the new world to begin with, you know, it's a composite world. And I remember I was talking to someone that they were saying, you know, like, European Union is like United States. No, it's not. It's not at all. It's actually in a way much harder to integrate, to have people communicate there. But I think that identity, it's a big, you know, I feel that the United States has resolved that by rallying its people, not around ethnicity or language, but around the Constitution. I feel that they said, okay, let's draft this document, and then no matter where you come from, you kind of gather around this, and this is the centerpiece. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's why Canada, it's it's a little bit more lost. But on the other hand, as you said, Canadians are a different breed in a sense that they are less focused on achievement and less tolerant to uncertainty. But let me tell you, pretty much the rest of the world is like that. And I also have doubts about people here because they maybe they are very strong in front of uncertainty, but that's because it's an uncertainty that they know, if I can use this word. It's an uncertainty that they know, but once they are in an uncertainty that is not familiar, if I can use this paradoxical talking, they have their own shortcomings. So, but I think, you know how it is, when Google kind of just sets an algorithm and we're all just trying, and then finally you're somewhere on the first page with your business, organically, so to speaking, and then Google scrambles the algorithm. So then everything, that's how I see what's happening in the world right now. The algorithms are scrambled, and I think that actually that's also an opportunity for Canadians to redefine their identity. But I agree, you can't redefine their identity the same way Romanians do.
So do you have an opinion about if we're speaking about organizations, which types of organizations grow in which types of culture? Like if I were to build a social technology versus a manufacturing, other than are there certain cultures that are more conducive to it as opposed to just economic environments?
Well, the thing is, people try to mimic. I think that the flexibility in dealing, that comes to customer culture. If you're going to have customers around the world, you have to be flexible in dealing with those worlds. I was helping some people promote their product. They promote it differently in Colombia than they promote it in Germany. So I don't know what your product is, but you have to have that flexibility. Now, a lot of people want to be like the US Americans because a lot of businesses here and a lot of consumers are here. And a lot of early adopters, specifically because, why? They deal well with uncertainty, and they are curious or excited a lot of times to do this. So what kind of business should you build? I think that, you figure out what is that you want to accomplish, but that flexibility, that's what cultural intelligence is, to know what exactly are those metrics. And those are numbers that you can figure out. There are average numbers by nations. And of course, not everybody's an average in a nation. And that's why when you have a group of customers, you do individual assessments and you figure out what kind of people are those. And then you speak their language. It's like a couple relationship, like we can all look amazing together, but if I like to spend money on restaurants and you like to cook home, we might not like each other. So on the other hand, if I want to appeal, if there are more than one person in this group, I allow myself to be flexible. And when you told me that this title has to be that way, I said, yeah, he's right.
But Cosmin, sorry to interrupt this, Philip.
No, please.
On one hand, I buy your analogy that, in a global world and companies are trying to become more and more global, they have to adapt to their customers and customize the product, the message, etc., to the local situation. Mm-hmm. So that's one driving force. But on the other hand, and this is the perplexing part, is you look at different groups within one country, whether they are conservative or liberals or some ethnic groups, and there have been studies done that show that despite the fact that we have so much information available on our fingertips, people tend to gravitate to the source of information that reinforces their initial culture or bias. So instead of reading 10 different perspectives, I focus on the 3 perspectives that are exactly where my mind was to start with, and I become even more kind of polarized and more ingrained in this culture. And when you look at some of the the impact on elections and choices, you see these small groups that are very much polarized and moving in one direction, having an overarching or an overweight impact on elections. Because they moved all in a group, even if it's a small group, they kind of get the balance to tilt. And so I'm wondering, when you look at these different forces, some forces saying, we need to globalize, adapt to other cultures, other forces very close to home saying we gain more if we stay in the pack. And by the way, our tendency is to stay in the pack, and despite the fact that we have all these options ahead of us. How do you see these two playing together? And do you think we're going to see one trend prevail over the other or not?
I think that we shouldn't struggle for one trend or the other. I see this as a continuum. So imagine that we have a line, and the end of one line is completely local. Foreigners out of my country. I don't want any products. No. The other extreme is completely globalized. Everything can come in. It doesn't matter if I make it here. So imagine that between these two extremes, there is an infinity of possibilities. So I believe that the cultures who are going to thrive are those who are able to slide between these two extremes, find what I call the aesthetic distance, which is the good enough distance is not in the middle, maybe, but maybe not. Between these extremes, a little bit of global and a lot of local, maybe. Other cultures say more global and less local. But I think that this is the secret, like how to identify that. This is about identity. What is my identity? How much globalization do I want in here? And that shouldn't be a reaction, like in an extreme case, right? Now, what you're saying is basically very true, that you and I and every single person tend to select from the outside world the information that reinforces our identity. I mean, we should do that because otherwise we would not have a sense of self. The problem is that sometimes that goes to an extreme, to the extreme that we become violent towards the others who intrude within our circle, right? These are circles, bubbles, like in that image that you saw, that superimpose each other and they come in conflict with each other. So, of course we do that. And that's when the bias kicks in. And that's when I say, bring the unconscious to the conscious. Because otherwise, politicians will exploit this to the ends of time. By the way, you know what is the advantage of moving to Mexico instead of Canada if a certain election is won this year?
Kilo.
There are three advantages. One, that Mexico is warmer than Canada. Second, that they have amazing tacos. And third, that there's going to be an actual wall between you and that person. So, yeah, it's what you're saying is very true. And these are the things that we need to work with. I mean, in Romania, people are just saying, we don't want Syrian refugees. Guys, nobody wants to come to Romania. Why are you worried about that? Right? Nobody would want. They want to go to Germany, to Sweden. Like, what are you going to do in Romania? Plus, I've had Syrian people, Lebanese people, Iraqi, Iranian people, colleagues in university 15 years ago. They're just amazing, Greeks. It's so easy to get along. It's so easy. It's just the rhetorics and the politics and all these things are.
Sorry, that reminds me.
I'm just going to take a note of time. We have 1 minute left. So last question. Go ahead, though.
Should I go ahead?
Yep. Is it a short one or a long question?
It's not even a question. It's just I wanted to talk about shortly about identity change and culture change, and it's something that happened to me, and I'm sure it happens to many of us. I grew up as an ethnic minority in Romania, being Hungarian, so I was very proud and very, aware of my own culture, and I tried to nurture it and so on. And there are factors and there are events when you basically switch the switching factor, the factor that made me change from that identity to another identity was exactly what Cosmin was saying about the Syrian refugees. When all these countries just didn't want them, and then I just couldn't anymore associate with that culture, with that mindset. So right now, maybe I'm becoming smarter or wiser, or I maybe because flexible. I'm living here in the United States, I see a more globalized world. I don't see an ethnic group. I don't see color. I don't see gender. I see people. And so right now, the thing that I mostly associate with is environment, being vegan, living a healthy lifestyle. So that's the first choice for me now. And then other things come.
If I just
add go ahead, David.
Something profound in what Cosmin said implicitly here, and that's that people from the Middle East, and I've lived there myself, get on great everywhere except in the Middle East.
True. I live in the Middle East too, and I live in other parts of the world.
Yeah, outside the Middle East, everybody gets on great.
Yeah, I know. That's how also Hungarians and Romanians get on great, except in Romania, or Hungary.
So there's that's profound, I think.
It is very profound. Thanks for pointing out.
Think more about, yeah.
So maybe fodder for another session, but I wanted to say, in the interest of time, thank you everybody, and thank you Cosmin. It's been awesome. Thank you, and thanks for a good conversation. So stay tuned for the next live video Q&A session. We've got to think of a snappier title. And please let me know, anybody, of course, if you're interested in presenting. Next up, we have this guy here, David Nordfors, talking about 5 billion customers want a good job, the untapped $100 trillion market for innovation for jobs. And following him is Jeff Hoffman. So we have the co-founder of Priceline, who is also in the hopper, and then we have Bob Cohen and the She Special Interest Group. So we have some pretty cool topics coming up, some very fundamental nerves to pick at with the group. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all again very, very soon. And again, thanks very much.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you, Cosmin. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, guys.